Dear friends, добрый вечер, дорогие друзья. Добро пожаловать на виртуальную площадку Русского дома в Брюсселе. And welcome to the virtual platform of the Russian House in Brussels. Today we have a very important evening, which will be held in English, but the exhibition we will speaking about, you can find it on our website russianhouse.be in two languages, in Russian and in English. Сегодняшний вечер, сегодняшняя встреча будет посвящена фотодокументальной выставке, которую вы сможете посмотреть на нашем сайте rushaus.be на двух языках, на русском и на английском. Но наш виртуальный вечер будет сегодня проходить на английском языке. And I will switch in English, and I'm very glad to introduce to you the one of our most important Russian museums, the Victory Museum in Moscow, and our guest and our guide of this evening, Ksenia Danchina, to whom I will give the floor just a few seconds later. So I remind you that our evening today is dedicated to one of the most important dates of our country's history in the 20th century. It's the blockade of Leningrad, of the 900-day siege of Leningrad, which was lifted on 27th of January 1944, and exactly 80 years ago. And we prepared, with the help of the Victory Museum in Moscow, we prepared a very interesting exhibition dedicated to this major historical event, crucial for our Russian history. And you can consult this exhibition on our website. I repeat it, rushaus.be. And we are very honored that today the Victory Museum will give us a virtual tour, virtual visit of this exhibition of the blockade of Leningrad. Thank you so much. So the floor is yours, Ksenia Danchina, Victory Museum of Moscow. And after the visit, you can ask the questions. We will be here for answering them. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would like to start with a short video about the Victory Museum. So, the Victory Museum is one of the largest military historical museums in Russia. It cherishes the memory of the feat of the people at the front and in the rear during the Great Patriotic War. Our expositions and excursions tell about the war, brave citizens of the country, heroes, and about the great victory. Today we are going to talk about the museum exhibition Leningrad Liberation Salute. It will be supplemented with other parts of the Victory Museum exhibitions related to besieged Leningrad. On the 27th of January 1944, the sky of Leningrad was illuminated by the fireworks in honor of the complete lifting of the blockade. 24 shots from 324 guns marked the victory of the great city on the Neva River, the front city that fought to the death against the enemy for 900 days and nights. The Victory Museum's exhibition commemorates the 80th anniversary of the complete liberation of Leningrad from the blockade, aiming to truthfully portray the courage, extraordinary willpower, and perseverance of the city's residents, who not only endured the hardships of life in the besieged city, but also did everything in their power to save their beloved Leningrad. The German plan Barbarossa, developed for the war with the Soviet Union, directly pointed to Leningrad as one of the three main directions of attack. The German army was divided into three groups. Each of them had its own purpose. The capture of Leningrad was the goal of the North Group, which was under the command of Field Marshal von Ley. On the 8th of September 1941, the troops of the North Group captured Schleswig. Thus, they cut off Leningrad from the rest of the country by land. A terrible blockade began on that day. The German army couldn't take the city immediately. That's why they decided to starve it out. Hitler ordered, "We must starve the city. Cut all the supply routes so that not a single mouse slips through, and then mercilessly bomb. Thus, the city will collapse like an overripe fruit." In the photo, we may see a part of diorama complex in the Victory Museum. It describes one of the winter days in Leningrad in 1941. There are all the famous places, the important places of the city. St. Isaac's Cathedral, Kazan Cathedral, and the Admiralty Building. The firefighters are trying to put out a fire from a German incendiary bomb. They are putting horses under the ice because there is no water in the city. The water supply was bombed in some places and it was frozen in some others. People had to go on ice with buckets and kettles to get some water. And one more source of water was melted snow, but because of the constant bombing, it was very dirty. That winter was really frosty. In some days, the temperature was minus 41 degrees Celsius. The heating of the houses was stopped. People began to organize stoves in their flats, and they heated them with all possible means. Parts of furniture, stools, chairs, and so on. People had no strength to go for firewood. There was no electricity in the city. Moreover, Leningrad was in darkness for blackout purposes. The Badaya food storage with sugar and flour was bombed on the first day of the blockade, on the 8th of September. The scariest thing for the residents of the city was hunger. People started to take soil in that places where the storage had been. As the soil was mixed with sugar and flour, people were cooking and selling it. The residents started to boil leather bags and gloves, wallpaper glue. The bread distribution rate was being reduced. It reached its minimum point in November 1941. The usual daily routine turned into a struggle of the population. In the photo, there is a man with a piece of bread in his hand. He looks like 60 years old man, but in fact, he is only 30. People had to exist for a whole day with such small piece of bread. Its weight was about 125 grams. It was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Because of the limited amount of flour, sawdust and cellulose were added to the bread in order to give it shape. Even in the horrible conditions, Leningrad continued to live. Theaters, libraries, factories, and research institutes worked. All forces were aimed at saving life in the city, as well as the speedy defeat of the enemy. The scientists who were in the besieged city, like all residents of Leningrad, had to solve tasks in a matter of weeks or even days that would have taken years before. They were looking for answers to the most important questions. How can you survive in the conditions that no one has found themselves in before? How can we provide the front with all necessary things if there are no necessary things left in the city? The processing of cellulose in order to turn it into food additive. The production of protein is based on wood. A vitamin drink and the science gave the besieged city the opportunity to survive. Scientists in the conditions of the besieged city developed new methods of treating citizens, as well as medicines that replace scarce medicines. A group of employees of the Leningrad Pasteur Institute has developed a methodology for determining the resistance of the human body to various diseases. The Leningrad Institute of Technology of the Refrigeration Industry has developed a method of fermentation of cellulose using mushrooms. The obtained materials were used in food products to create a dough-like substance in bread. The scientist Bezubov developed a technology for the production of a vitamin preparation based on needles. It was called the elixir of life. This drink helped to prevent the spread of scurvy, a deficiency of vitamin C. Leningrad botanical scientists have developed a technology for preserving cut vegetation, thanks to which broken branches, bushes, and fell trees woven into camouflage nets preserved their natural color and appearance for a whole season. Botanists actively studied the pharmacological properties of plants, ways to introduce wild plants into food in order to help exhausted residents and veterans. In the Department of Spore Plants of Botanical Institute, for the first time in the USSR, an antibiotic benane was obtained from lichen, the sodium salt of arsenic acid. Medicinal belladonna, valerian, began to be grown in 1942 after an order from the city. And already in 1943, the plan for growing digitalis was exceeded. A number of brochures have been written on the use of the sphagnum moss as a dressing material. All efforts were devoted to maintaining life. One of the main symbols in the struggle of the inhabitants of Leningrad was the road laid on the ice of Lake Ladoga. It was called the Road of Life. It was used to evacuate the population and industrial equipment from Leningrad and to deliver food, fuel, reinforcements, weapons, and ammunition to the besieged city. It was the connecting thread of Leningrad with the country. In total, 1,615,000 tons of cargo were transported along the Road of Life. Approximately 1,376,000 people were evacuated. However, it was also a so-called road of death for truck drivers, as the lake was under constant shelling and bombing. Scientists played a huge role in the creation of this route. Despite the fact that the ice strengthened in November 1941, some cars began to go underwater. Scientists studied the thickness of ice, undercurrents, and the influence of wind, and they found out how many trucks could be in one area at the same time. The organization of the Road of Life was a unique result of the work of Soviet scientists and military experts. It is often presented as ice, along which there are trucks with flour, but the road had more different components. It was a telephone and telegraph cable. It was an electric cable. It was also a pipeline that supplied fuel. These underwater arteries supplied life to the city. Furthermore, Soviet divers participated in the creation of this road. The idea of laying a pipeline along the bottom of Ladoga was suggested by the only Soviet female diver, Nina Sokolova. She made preliminary calculations and proved the possibility of its construction. During the war, Nina Sokolova, being the chief engineer of the 27th Emergency Rescue Detachment of EMPRON, participated in underwater work on the Neva River and Lake Ladoga. The pipeline was laid at night 2 kilometers from the front line. In total, about 1,000 people were involved in its construction. The total length of the pipeline turned out to be 34 kilometers, of which 26 were underwater. During the entire operation of the pipeline, approximately 40,000 tons of fuel passed through it. Nina Sokolova received the Order of the Red Star for her idea and direct participation in the implementation. Along the road of life, people also began to export ammunition and weapons that were produced in Leningrad factories. At the beginning of the blockade, 1902 enterprises were transported to the eastern part of the country. 840 factories out of 1,000 stopped working, and about 50 factories continued to work. Retired people, women, and teenagers worked at the factories instead of men. They tried to exceed production standards and worked 14 and sometimes 16 hours a day. If we talk about children, they were 12 years old boys and girls. Sometimes they were even younger. The working day for a teenager was supposed to be 6 hours, but it was much longer. At the child's workplace, it was possible to find a poster with the inscription, "I will not leave until I fulfill the norm." Everyone believed that the more shells they produced, the sooner the blockade and the war would end. Despite exhaustion, children contributed to the defense of their hometown by combining public work with their studies. Teenagers had to work alongside adults, standing at the machines in military factories, standing guard on rooftops, extinguishing incendiary bombs on the roof space, growing vegetables in the collective farms, caring for wounded and sick people, helping to catch spies and saboteurs. In addition to working days, the cultural life of the city continued. Theaters, performances, music. Culture helped to believe in the victory. The left photo shows the Soviet composer Dmitry Shostakovich. During the siege of Leningrad, he created the famous Symphony No. 7, which was also called the Leningrad Symphony. It was performed by the symphony orchestra in 1942. The music was broadcast on radio, so even German soldiers could hear it. The music showed everyone that Leningrad was alive and that it was not surrendering. People tried to preserve the cultural heritage of the great country. On the 22nd of June 1941, the German troops invaded the territory of the USSR, and the Great Patriotic War began. The news about the beginning of the war was announced on radio. In the photo, we may see Leningrad citizens who are listening to the report in the street. The residents started to build fortifications and disguise cultural monuments from the first day of war, before the blockade began. In July 1941, preparations for the defense of the city began. Fortifications were built on the Luga defensive line near Krasnogvardeysk and near Kolpino. On the 3rd of September 1941, the main tasks for the construction of a defensive line in the city were defined. Initially, they tried to cope with field fortifications and anti-tank ditches. After German troops entered the suburbs of Leningrad, the construction of long-term defensive structures began. One of the top priorities in the defense of the city was the camouflage of strategically important objects. Individual buildings and whole areas were transformed into green spaces, urban development, ruins, and visually extended streets. The coloring of the decorations changed according to the seasons. This work was carried out by theater workers, architects, artists, and students of the Academy of Arts. On the fourth day of the war, on the 25th of June 1941, a plan of activities to protect the city's monuments and park sculptures was approved. Special structures consisting of a wooden frame, sand filling, or sandbags were installed around the monuments that remained in place. Other monuments were removed from their pedestals and buried in the ground. A lot of art pieces were transported to other parts of the country, but some of them remained in Leningrad. Nevertheless, some cultural objects were destroyed or even lost. The obvious example is the Amber Room in Tsarskoye Selo near St. Petersburg. The existing room was rebuilt by Soviet architects in a post-war period. Historically, this room was a present for Peter I, and unfortunately, when the Great Patriotic War began, the citizens didn't have enough time to take it apart. That's why they decided to hide the room. Despite this, the architect monuments of the 18th century was found by Nazi soldiers. They transported the room to Königsberg, and nowadays nobody knows anything about this room. One more example was Pavlovsk Palace, which was under attack of the German army. About 9,000 art items were burned because of the incendiary bombs dropped on the palace. At the oldest Leningrad Zoo, at the beginning of the war, part of the collection was sent to the rear, to Kazan. The rest of the animals remained in Leningrad. At the beginning of July 1941, all large predators that could be dangerous if they left the cages, for example, lions, bears, wolves, they had to be shot. By the beginning of the blockade of the city on the 8th of September, there were only 237 animals out of 450 in the zoo. On the 9th and 10th of September 1941, the first Syrian raid took place. 3 high explosive bombs fell on the territory of the zoo. One of them destroyed the entrance and ticket offices. The second one fell a few meters from the monkey house, and the third one hit the fire lodge near the elephant house, which collapsed. The elephant Betty, which had lived in the zoo since 1911, turned out to be under the rubble. Some of the animals died, some were injured. By winter of 1941, the zoo lost its electricity supply and water supply system failed. Animals began to die not only from shellings, but also from cold and hunger. But the Leningrad Zoo reopened its doors to visitors in the summer of 1941. Approximately 100 animals were demonstrated. During 3 summer months, 7,400 people visited the zoo. All the years of the blockade, the animal theater continued to work in the zoo. Trainers Rayevsky and Rukavichnikov, with a group of trained animals, Bear cubs, dogs, a monkey, a fox, a goat, they delighted the wounded people and children of the city with their performances. In 1943, the first additions to the zoo collections were made from local animals. In May and June, bear cubs, Patap and Mania were transferred to the zoo. In early 1944, an aquarium was organized. Visitors could see local species of fish. So, the children of besieged Leningrad performed feats every day. They continued to study. They continued to gain knowledge. During the first year of the blockade, many children couldn't attend school. Classes were held in bomb shelters and in libraries. There were no more than 3 lessons per day. They put on warm clothes, wrote on scraps of newspapers, and attended 20 minutes classes. They were sure that every excellent grade helped to fight with the enemy. From January 1943, after the breakthrough of the blockade, the number of pupils began to grow. The materials, tools created from available materials due to resource shortages, and new teaching methods were used even after the end of the war. Textbooks, popular science books, and teaching aids were repeatedly reissued. There was a story of an 11 years old girl. Her name was Tanya Savicheva. Tanya also found herself in besieged Leningrad. She kept a diary in a notebook with an alphabetical index. Members of the Savichev family were dying, and Tanya was writing down the date and the time of their death. So, the letter G, grandmother died. The letter L, Loka died. The letter U, Uncle Vasa died. The letter M, mother, the most beloved and important person in Tanya's life. She couldn't write the word died. That's why there was the word mother, the date, and the time. The last inscription in the diary was the Savichevs died, everyone died. Tanya was evacuated from Leningrad in 1942, but unfortunately, the girl had serious health problems and she died in 1944. Her diary was the main proof of the Nazi atrocities at the trials. Libraries continued to work even in the conditions of starvation and destruction of the city. Children came there to study. The libraries were supposed as classrooms. Adults came there in order to find necessary information, answers to different questions. So the library was like a storage of knowledge. Topics were different. For instance, how to make houses warmer or how to use water, how to raise certain types of potato, or even which plants may be used as food. Moreover, people read classical literature, both national and foreign. Such literature helped to escape from military everyday life. And everyone liked to read fairy tales where good triumphed over evil. Thus, the librarians were saving the books. They were saving the cultural heritage and the history of the country. On the 18th of January 1943, during Operation Iskra, the troops of the Volkhov and Leningrad fronts cut through the Wehrmacht defenses with powerful blows towards each other and drove the enemy 12 kilometers from the coast of Ladoga in a few days. In the photo, we may see Soviet soldiers of the Volkhov and Leningrad fronts, and they have met near Schlisselburg. They are smiling, hugging, they are glad to see each other. After spending 3 weeks repairing the railway, the first trains with supplies and weapons arrived in Leningrad, improving the delivery of electricity. This railway line was called the Road of the Victory. The blockade of Leningrad was completely lifted during the Leningrad-Novgorod operation, which was also called Operation January Thunder. It was carried out by Soviet troops from the 14th of January to the 1st of March 1944. On the 27th of January 1944, Leningrad was completely liberated. The enemy was pushed back 280 kilometers from the city, and the artillery shelling of the Leningrad ceased. As a result of the operation, Soviet troops reached the border of Latvia and Estonia. The decree from General Headquarters on the 27th of January 1944 ordered the firework to be performed in Leningrad. The firework began at 8 p.m. with 24 shots of artillery pieces sounding, accompanied by a firework display and searchlights. Thousands of exhausted residents of Leningrad went to the streets to celebrate the common victory. It was a victory over the enemy, over hunger, fear, and death. So, thank you for your attention. If you have questions, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Ksenia. Really, it's very hard, but very interesting visit. And I think that our public is so impressed that maybe they will think before asking you questions. But for the moment, if I don't see any hand, you can write your question in the comments, and you can raise your hand if you want to ask your question personally, and we'll give you the floor, or maybe for a comment. But for the moment, I see that people are thinking about what you said us, and really it's a visit that is not exciting, that is not amazing. It's a visit for thinking and for understanding, and needs time for it. So I remind you that you can follow this video on our YouTube channel. And I invite you to watch the exhibition dedicated to Leningrad Victory Salute on the website of Russian House in Brussels, russhouse.be. And I think thank you, Ksenia, so much, and I thank the Victory Museum in Moscow for preparing such a kind of great exhibition, great events dedicated to the crucial events, periods of our history in 20th century. Thank you so much, and see you later on the virtual platform of the Russian House in Brussels. Take care for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.